عندي 106 سنين 106 سنين الحمد لله.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Meet Us on the Abraham Path. I'm Anisa, Executive Director of the Abraham Path Initiative, and it's so good to see so many of our friends here today. Thanks a lot for joining us. It's going to be a really fun show. Abraham Path Initiative nurtures economic growth, cross-cultural communication, and heritage preservation through community-based tourism and online programming. We highlight the landscapes and traditions of hospitality in the complex region commonly called the Middle East. Geographically, of course, we're talking about Southwest Asia, where we work mostly with rural communities. We build walking trails, train guides, engage homestays. We've catalyzed some 1,200 miles of trail to date, and more than 80,000 people have walked on parts of these trails in Jordan, Palestine, Sinai, and Turkey. Currently, we're developing a long-distance hiking trail in the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq. And hot off the press, the New York Times Magazine published an article on our trailblazing work in Iraqi Kurdistan this week. It was written by Ben Mauk, M-A-U-K. He did a great job, and you should read it. API fellow Leon McCarron and our partner Lawin Mohammad, who are featured in the New York Times Magazine article, are on location right now, scouting trails in the Zagros Mountains north of Erbil, which is the regional capital. Leon is a writer, a broadcaster, trail developer, and walker who's been inside API's inner circle since 2016, when he walked a 1,000-mile circuit of the trails we'd built to date, and he wrote this book about that. The Land Beyond, 1,000 Miles on Foot Through the Middle East. You will learn more about Lawin in just a moment. Next month, both Leon and Lawin will be with us in person, telling us about their adventures. Today, we'll hear them talking with me about this project back in 2020. Now, before going to the recording, I want you to think back for a moment to June 2020. Quarantines. Scarcity of supplies, no vaccines available, and certainly no professional haircuts. You'll understand why I tell you that when we roll the tape. Those were the early days of webinars too. Lots of technical difficulties, and so we will be jumping into this conversation in the middle of an audio problem. I'm in New Jersey, Leon's in the UK, Lawin and our colleague Miran are at Erbil's famous ancient Citadel. And I'll tell you, with that particular audio problem, I was so relieved that Leon's a real pro.
While we're waiting, I'll just jump in for people who are watching to say that Kurdistan has just gone into another lockdown. Lawin, you'll probably tell us a little bit more about that in the interim, but as an example of the sort of people that we've been able to work with in the region, I always think Lawin and Miran, between them, can make anything happen. And the fact that they can get to the top of the Citadel in the midst of a lockdown is the best possible example you could ever want of that. Because Lawin, right now, everyone else is hidden away, right? They're all at home under a 5-day curfew.
I think I have a problem in the audio as well.
Oh, you have it as well?
Yeah. I cannot hear you well. And Anisa, I lost her voice. A tour?
Yeah, why do you start with a tour, Lawin? If you can't hear us, you start with a tour.
Yeah, let me just tell you that I'm currently on the top of Erbil Citadel, which we call it in Kurdish as a qalat. Qalat is considered as a sign of resistance for every single Kurdish, because everybody who tried to invade, all the invaders who tried to invade Kurdistan or occupy Kurdistan, they have been defeated here in this citadel. So the citadel is its history back to 600 years BC, and it's 400 meters above sea level. So here is the entrance of the citadel. With the Kurdish flag, I don't think that we cannot, because of the light, we cannot see a flag. So now I'm in the entrance of the citadel. Yeah.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what it's like there normally, how busy it normally gets.
As you can see, it's completely empty. The mosque is Khanqa al-Khalidiyya Mosque, 250 years old mosque. Normally it's crowded. Here it's a 24 hours to the midnight, it's crowded, but because of the lockdown and the curfew, so we cannot see anybody here.
Lawin, what is this other building we're seeing right now with the rounded walls across from the mosque?
It's a new building because we had some buildings here in the center of the citadel. So the government had created this like a garden or the waterfall, and they replaced them with that building, the white building, replaced people and gave them lands there. So the shops turned to the other side of the citadel, the other side of the mosque. So all the shops have been turned to the modern shops. They are shops that were here in this place and then turned to the other side of the mosque. The white building, if you mean it.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
It's so interesting to see how quiet it is. It compares to the to what we see here, that our neighborhoods are quiet and that our downtowns are quiet. Slowly, we're getting a little bit more activity as some movement restrictions lift, but it's really a feeling of unity to see how similar our situations are. What you're experiencing.
Crowded here, you will see tourists, you'll see people, journalists, TV reporters. They are just coming here for. Erbil became like a center for the media, for the tourists in all Iraq. So, and you see it's empty. So strange for me as well to see it's completely empty. Nobody here, you know, just it's completely quiet.
Well, we imagine that it may change slowly. Let's start with where you and Leon met, and let's move toward what we hope may be the changes to come in the future. How did you guys meet?
I met him 4 years ago. A mutual friend of us called Claudio Von Planta provided him with my contacts to contact me if he came to Kurdistan for help, to know the city, to somebody to be with. So we met 4 years ago in Erbil, and then we decided to find the trails, telling stories, making documentaries in Kurdistan, as he was interested to know more about Kurdistan. And I love this thing for him. So he was so interested to know more about Kurdistan. For me as a Kurd, you know, as a Kurdish guy, I love to work with him and to do something together. Making documentaries, we made some documentaries, we found the trails and tales and explore Kurdistan together. 4 years and of tours, trips, and exploring Kurdistan together. So if Leon has something to say about Kurdistan as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was such a great first encounter really for me. I came to the city, and I was actually trying to write a story about another city in federal Iraq, and I came there, and it was a very difficult time. It was just when the offensive was beginning to liberate the city of Mosul, and I was trying to get to a city called Karakosh, and this mutual friend, Claudio, who's a very talented, wonderful filmmaker and a real inspiration as well, said you should meet Lawin, and he's the sort of person that when he recommends you meet someone, you know they're going to be interesting. But it was when I arrived in the Kurdish region first, I guess I knew a little bit about the landscape and that it was mountainous, but it wasn't in my mind at all to go off and hike and explore and have all of these fun adventures and journeys that we'd made it. But it was in that first meeting with Lawin, he said, really, you know, if you're going to spend some time here, you should come into the mountains and see what Kurdistan's really like. You know, this was the first time I'd been pitched the idea of this is the other Iraq. Come and see this, and with Miran as well, who's in the background. We've made many journeys now for 4 years, and I said it at the start, but between the two of them, they can make anything happen.
What I want you to know about Lawin, everybody, is that Lawin, you already know how competent and skilled he is because of Leon's comments. He also works with API fellow Stephanie Saldana in her cultural heritage research work. But he's a trained professor of English literature. And he's fond of Christopher Marlowe, Charles Dickens, Samuel Beckett. And this is something you might not have expected. It was really very cool for me to hear about that. Lawin is Kurdish from Syria and had to flee Syria because of the civil war. He went to Iraq in 2012 and made Erbil his new home. I'd like you to tell us about the project you're doing for Abraham Path Initiative.
I'll start, and then Lawin can take over with his in-depth knowledge as well. I mean, it really began from those first journeys that we took, which were just recreational. Lawin wanted to show me some of the wonderful landscapes and places that he'd come to know in the Kurdistan region. And it occurred to me, when I was there, having seen how trails had been developed in other parts of the region, that this was a place that was perfectly suited for this, and that all the benefits that trails bring elsewhere would be really apt for this area. So we began to talk about it. So we looked around for some pre-existing trails, and of course what we had already been doing was just walking the trails that had been there for many thousands of years, starting with the old donkey trail in a town called Amidi, way up in the mountains, a kind of ancient town on the top of a hill. And I'll let Lawin talk about Amidi because
Silk Road City.
And Lawin, maybe you can tell us a little bit about Amidi and that first trail that we found together. That was the first one we went to.
I think all these trails started from the Amidi. When we start, Amidi was the place that I wanted to visit, even if I was in Syria. When I visited with Leon, we saw how spectacular place in the top of this mountain. They built this town, historical town, and the gate was really the gate to our trails. The gate of Amidi, which called Mosul Gate, was a gate, but the gate for all our work for API, for documentaries. We found the trail that's going to Mosul, the donkey trails they were used. Amidi was a trade center for all the area, for the empire, the old Kurdish empire. So we said, let us try to walk on it, since Leon is, a great walker and hiker. And I love it. So we try to explore it, to hike. Let us hike this way, to scout it, since we don't have a map, we don't have so the first year or 2 years, we were just scouting. We just going and walk to scout, to explore, to discover places. And then with API, we started to do it in a really professional way with the team, with the maps. Then at the end, we had our guests. So everything started from the gate of Amidi, from Mosul Gate in Amidi, and then Acre as well. Amidi and Acre being two of the most important places, historical places in the history of Kurdistan, not only in the area, in all 4 parts of Kurdistan. So everything started from there, and then we could create these trails.
So, I mean, in a really broad sense, what we've been doing so far is just gathering information, right? We've been scouting to try and gather and document as much as we possibly can on the trails that already exist in the region. And if you can imagine, you can see it in the map below. This is the sort of east-west corridor in the Kurdish region, and that's where we've focused most of our attention so far. And these are the areas that we find to be the most exciting to walk in, whether that's for natural beauty or the history, the hospitality. There's so many reasons. So the Amidi area, Acre, Barzan, Rwanduz, and out to Choman, which is out by the Iranian border, if that helps orientate.
Leon, sorry to interrupt. We had a couple of people who are wondering what surprised you most. You've walked in so many places. What surprised you most when you got to the Kurdish region of northern Iraq?
I guess it's a good question. I mean, what surprised me most was that I went there to try and write this story about a different city, and within a couple of weeks, I was just off walking in the hills, and it was amazing to me that at the moment that I landed in Erbil for the first time, it was, of course, it was a very tense time in the country in general at that point, but it made the juxtaposition between the interpretation of what Iraq is to a lot of people as a center of conflict and as a dangerous place, with what the reality is of Lawin and McCarron and I walking through these mountain villages and staying in people's homes and drinking tea. It brought that really into sharp focus. And so I think that was something I maybe had learned to hope would happen when I went to places that are often misunderstood. But it was surely the biggest surprise to have got there and find myself in this beautiful, alpine paradise, whilst the city of Mosul and all of that was just, this was the end of 2016, whilst all of that was, only 50, 60 miles away.
Well, I'll say as an Iraqi American, I really appreciate you expanding our understanding of the people and the places beyond what we see in the headlines. It makes a huge difference in so many ways. Take us along your journey a bit.
Yeah, and I think that's what was so wonderful about working with Lawin and with the rest of our collaborators is that there hasn't, I think Lawin, you probably would agree with this, that a lot of the people we met along the way felt as if they'd never had a chance to show off all of the natural beauty and histories of their places, because the only way that anyone from the outside and even people from the inside had viewed where they were is through the lens of conflict and suffering and hardship and so on. So to be able to bring the positives out was something that was really exciting. But if we look at the map again, just to quickly orientate our listeners, and then we'll move on to some of the pictures. So this is, if you can imagine, Amidi, just above that is Turkey, and you can see where the Turkish border comes down. Iran is off to the east. There's a border close to Choman, and then on the other side, of course, you're getting towards Syria. So the last 3 years or so, and particularly the last year, Lawin and I and Ben from API and a number of other people who've come and gone from our journeys have just been scouting to see where the most interesting areas are. And the first picture that we've got is of Lawin and I on Mount Halgurd, and Lawin chose this as this is actually a place which is worth saying is not on our trail that we're hoping for, because it's quite technical and quite intense. But in terms of adventure, it's quite exciting. In terms of places that you don't expect to find in Iraq or in Kurdistan, it's pretty apt. So Lawin, tell us about your experience of trying to climb Mount Halgurd.
This photo speaks itself. Despite trying to climb and hike for 2 days to reach the top of Halgurd peak, and despite the lighting and rainstorm that had in our tents with the Ben and Miran and you, but we were happy. We were extremely happy. To be on the top of the Halgurd mountain, which is the highest peak in Kurdistan. It was really an amazing experience. As soon as you reach on the top, you feel that you forget all your, if you are exhausted or you are tired or you will forget everything. You will feel something special on the top, and you can see the faces in the photo, how happy we are, how glad we are to be there.
Lawin, I'm looking behind you and I'm seeing snow-capped mountains. What mountains are those? Is that facing Iran there, or is that facing north toward Turkey or toward Syria?
No, it's Iranian border. Halgort Mountain. In front of it, we have Sakran Mountain, but in the photo is a Iranian border. Mountains inside Iran. It's in Iranian border.
These are snow-capped most of the year. So, I mean, you can climb them in winter, but it's really pretty difficult. Halgord is 3,600 meters, so that's just under 12,000 feet, I guess. So they're pretty big. You know, they're not small mountains at all. And to climb them does require quite a bit of technical expertise and a good deal of luck as well with the weather. But it shows you the variety of landscapes that we have in this relatively small part of the world. So the second picture we've got as well, which is another one of these moments on our journeys. This is with another trail scouting collaborator, Tom Allen, who's done a lot of work in Armenia and in the Caucasus. This is another one of, I think, Lawin's highlights. So Lawin, maybe you can tell us where we are here and why you like this picture.
Yeah, first of all, let me say that as a walker, as a hiker, you should always expect that you have one day someday you end with nowhere to stay because of the hiking. One day takes longer, one day takes longer than what you think. So maybe you end in some place that no place to stay. But in Kurdistan, you can feel home everywhere, really. This photo, we ended in Dinarte town, and we had no place to stay. So we stayed at the Peshmerga training campus. Peshmerga, just to clarify for the audience, they literally means the sacrificers, the people who face death. They are the Kurdistan. They are Kurdistan forces, military forces. So we stayed with them. We spent the night with them. They cooked for us in the midnight, and we drank like a dozen cup of teas. Yeah, it was really another day to be remembered. We stayed with Peshmerga campus. We stayed with them. They provide us with the heaters. It was extremely cold. They brought heaters, more blankets. They cooked midnight. Really, at the midnight, they start to cook for us, and we had a good experience there with Peshmerga in Dinarte town, the town called Dinarte.
I just want to point out that right now, live behind Lawin, you're hearing the call to the evening prayer in Erbil. And this is really related to Abraham too, because the call to prayer was an instruction by God, and it says in the Quran, to invite people to come and pray, particularly toward the shrine called the Kaaba at Mecca. Yeah. So I feel very connected. It's nice to hear the call again.
Yes, it's nice. This is like a bridge of cultures, a bridge that connects cultures together. Now it's 7:30 local time in Erbil, time of prayer. So
it's a nice sound. Our next picture is a very different type of region as well, and I mean it's one of I think for both Lawin and I, and for Anwar, who's sitting on the tree, and for Ben Barrows, who's in the tree. This is probably all of us would agree. This is one of our favorite areas to walk in the whole region, and it's in the Barzan area. So Lawin, tell us about the day we found this.
My favorite photo in my favorite spot in Kurdistan, Zorakvan area. Zorakvan belongs to Barzan area. Imagine walking and hiking for hours in high temperature weather, and accidentally you found a spot of waterfall, shadow, and really cool area. So without any thought, you will jump inside the water. And Barzan, let me just clarify, Barzan area in Kurdistan has its own rules regarding environment protection. They have hunting, fishing, cut trees, are all of them are forbidden in Barzan area. That's why till now you can find really rare kind of animals there, like bears, like wild goats, deers, eagles, and Barzan still has its spectacular landscapes, stunning landscapes, because there is nobody can cut the trees. It's not allowed to cut it, and yeah, Barzan has its own rules regarding environment protection.
We have a question here for you, which is, what kind of facilities are available for hikers? How developed is this trail at this point?
You mean? Well, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Well, I mean, at the minute, there are a number of people who hike in the country, but there aren't really any facilities for hikers. There's a growing culture of recreational hiking and walking, and there are perhaps 40 groups around the region who go out and hike on the weekends, the sort of thing you might find in our countries, but there aren't really any facilities yet for hikers, and there isn't such a thing as a long distance trail. People just know nice spots that they can go to and hike, and so that's part of our long-term aim here, but that's quite a ways off yet. I mean, we'll in the next kind of 10 minutes or so, we'll kind of circle back around to that and maybe get a little bit more information on exactly where we are right now in that process. But if you can imagine the whole journey of designing a trail as a trail itself, then we're still in the first few steps. You know, we've just kind of set out onto the path ourselves, and this is the fun part of it. We walk tens and hundreds of kilometers to learn as much as we can, and then from that we distill down what are going to be the most impactful parts, what tells the best story, where's the most potential to develop, and have people who live along the corridor of their path be part of it, and be able to really have them invest in it as well, and be able to tell the story for years and years to come. Which is actually, I mean, if we move on to the next picture, this is another part of our process, which is as well as just enjoying the landscapes and in the hospitality, we really are trying to research as much as we can. And it's easy to research about places that are there and in front of our eyes and obvious, but so much of the beauty of this region is in its depth of history, as well as in its interest in a contemporary sense. And so this is a family that we met on that same day in the Barzan area. And Lawin, you can tell us their story, because what often happens is we'll meet a family or some individuals on the trail, and of course we send Lawin to introduce himself, to introduce the mission that we're on, and to ask them what they can tell us about where we are.
Normally we met many families, but inside the villages, towns, like 5 houses, villages. But to see one family in one spot area alone, just one family, it was strange for us. So we met them accidentally, Murad family in Barzan area. They had a village called Osamuran in this area 30 years ago, but their village had been destroyed. But every year they came 2 months, June and July, to this spot of their family, for their village with their livestock. They brought they are bringing their livestock here to live 2 months, and they live really simple, easy, natural life, living really simple, natural, in a tent, with no technology, nothing, just enjoying living with the livestock for 2 months. Then they will come back to their town that they moved to. So we met them. We heard some stories from them. They invited us to the lunch, a healthy lunch, a healthy food, because all the stuff of what they are eating, what they are drinking, all of it, all the stuff are natural and from their farm. So they are coming every year, 2 months a year. They coming to this area in the June and July for their livestock, and then come back to the town for the rest of the year.
And if we imagine now that this is the kind of central area of that east-west trail corridor that we looked at, with the high snowy mountains in the east by the Iranian border, the next picture that we've got, which is an area that Lawin and I both really love as well, is right out in the west of where we've been to. In fact, this is the western extreme of both the Kurdistan region. It's where it more or less meets the boundary with federal Iraq, and it's also the westernmost point that we've scouted. But Lawin, tell us about Al-Khosh and what we're looking at.
Al-Khosh is a Christian city. It was our last trip before COVID-19 pandemic. So it's Ruban Hormuz Monastery. This monastery that we see in the photo is in Al-Khosh town, a Christian town close to Duhok city. The monastery is like a masterpiece, and built on the top of the mountain, and its history back to the 640 BC. It's not famous only in Kurdistan or only in Iraq. It's all in all Middle East. They came every year. They have 100,000 of people who come to visit. And Al-Khosh also has a sign of coexistence. They have a tomb of Prophet Nahum for the Jews. And every single Kurdish village, you can see the families from different religions, from different ideologies.
So when we got to Al-Khosh, we tried to find a path that would, or a series of paths and trails that would join the monastery to some of the other areas that we knew better. And we haven't quite finished that linking part yet, but that's one of the things we'll go back to do. So we've, Lawin and I we digitally record all the tracks that we walk, and then study the satellite imagery as well to try and see how they might connect. And we've probably walked in the last year or so around about 400 to 500 kilometers, so 300 plus miles of different trails, and that's led us to about 175 kilometers of continuous trail, which runs from Akre to Choman. And so let's say 120 miles, something around that. And the next phase will be to have a more systematic approach, really to assess what the next 3 to 5 years will look like as we bring that to the next stages.
Hey, Leon, Matthew Teller's with us, and he was wondering, how fit do you have to be?
Well, that's the beauty of these long distance trails, is that you can design your own experience. And so some of the day stages of this trail the best ones are less than 10 miles for a day, because there's so much to see and do along the way. And this is it's not about fitness. It's not about showing how tough you can be or trying to exhaust yourself by the end of the day. It's about the immersive experience and about all of these different things that you will see and do and feel along the way. There are certain sections through the mountains that are more physically challenging, but we try and make those stages shorter in distance so that compensates for it. So I guess I'd answer the question by saying the scouting part of the process understandably pushes us all a little bit more, because we sometimes cover 30, 40, 50 kilometers in a day to try and get as much in as we can and gather that information as quickly as possible. But when we eventually turn it into an experience for others, the whole point of this is to make walking accessible and through walking to learn everything else about the region. Well, we got one more picture before, and then we'll talk about some of the group trips that we've run and planned. I just briefly wanted to touch on some of the other local collaborators that we have and the people who've been pioneering some different sections. And I thought I'd mention Ahmed Razani. This is a beautiful picture here taken by Emily Garthwaite. Ahmed, as much as anyone, exemplifies this sort of reception that we've been given as we walk and the vision that he has for the trail. So Lawin, what do you first remember about meeting Ahmed?
Ahmed Razani is one of the best local guiders, or maybe you can call him a hiker as well. Ahmed Razani spent 12 years on the mountains as a Peshmerga. And the most funny story is about him that he spent his honeymoon in the mountains walking, and he has stories about how he fled to Iran and had come back through mountains, how he walked 5 days in a row, non-stop 5 days walking on the mountains from Rawanduz, which is included in our trails, till the Iranian border. And he crossed the border to Iran and then come back. This is like 15 years ago.
Yeah, he gave us a really wonderful sense of perspective as well. Ahmed was able to remind us of how much conflict in the past this region had seen, and how he for many years had to be on the move. He lived in the mountains because he had to. It was the only way he could stay alive. And I think he said to us at one point that he quite literally fought for the right to walk there. He dedicated his life to fighting for the freedom to do something as simple as going for a walk. For him, it's turned from a place of refuge into a place of recreation. And I think that powerful transformation, which he feels very acutely, and anyone who walks with him and walks on the trails that he shows us feels as well. We'll move to the final picture that we have. We, for the first time, got to show some of the work that we'd done to a small group of other people, of other pioneers. We ran the inaugural group trip on the trail at the end of last year. And as I've hopefully emphasized, this project's still in the very, very early stages, but it was wonderful to show those early stages to these people, to Oliver and to Jamie, and Emily, and Ben's in there too. And for those guests to meet someone like Ahmed and to hear his stories and really begin to feel, the depth of experience and connection that someone like him has to these mountains. So this is what we hope that there'll be much more of in years to come.
Thank you both very much. So what's the forecast, Lawin?
I think the only challenge is COVID-19. As soon as hopefully this will be over, so we will hike again, we will develop our trails again, we will have more guests. That's our aim. More people to see our culture, more people to see our country, and we ourselves to explore our country. Because what API is doing, and a trail is not just by walking. By walking, you are exchanging culture. It's like a bridge to connect cultures together.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best possible answer there is. We don't know what'll happen in Kurdistan or anywhere else in the world, but we can be reasonably optimistic. I think that as soon as we can travel again, we'll be back out in the mountains.
And would you talk a little, perhaps, Leon, about safety issues? Is it safe to walk along the Iranian border? We're talking about a post-conflict region. What are some of the hurdles you come across?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I realize we probably should have started with some of that context. So, I mean, the Kurdistan region is semi-autonomous, and therefore is, let's say, politically quite a different entity from the rest of Iraq. It's very easy to get there when there's not a pandemic. You can arrive at Erbil Airport and get a visa on arrival, and so on. And so, safety concerns, all of those sorts of things, it's worth just reminding everyone that those are there's nothing to worry about, no more than anywhere else in the world, and probably a lot less than certain places. On the trail, there are challenges. There's been a lot of conflict here in the past. There are a lot of huge number of unexploded ordnance and mines on the mountains, and a lot of those areas there's never been the facility to properly mark up where those areas are, and certainly not to remove them. Now, any people who live and work in those areas, of course, know where they are. The shepherds, the farmers, the people in the villages, anyone who walks follows those local experts' advice and where they are. And of course, we follow the advice of everyone else. All of the trails that we've been using are very well established and have been walked on for many numbers of years by people who live in the areas. But it does limit us in our exploration, let's say, because we can only use trails that people are absolutely certain are safe. Safety, as you imagine, would be the top priority for an endeavor like this. And what we hope, I mean, we're working now to create the sustainable trail development plan for the future. And part of that will be how to implement the best possible strategy to allow people to come and enjoy this, and to allow people who live along the trail to enjoy it as well, and to welcome and engage with hikers, as Lawin so articulately described. Another part of it might be to look at ways in which our project can help to start to remove some of those threats, like the minefields, how we can properly cordon them off to make life better for those who live alongside them, and eventually to also try and remove them. And it's a huge project. There's more unexploded mines per square meter in this part of Iraq than just about anywhere else in the world. But it would be a really wonderful objective for us to have alongside the development of the trail.
We've just been listening to API fellow Leon McCarron, our partner Lawin Mohammad, and friend and facilitator McCarron from a June 2020 webinar. And as I said, they're right now scouting trails will be with us next month in person. So joining us now is API Director of Operations, Ben Barrows, who is also directing our trail development project in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Anisa. I'm really excited to be here.
I bet you are. You must be excited to be leaving on Tuesday for Erbil.
So exciting. Been waiting a long time to get back out into the field.
Yeah, you were in Iraq twice for API in 2019 on this project. You'd been there before also in previous positions. What struck you most, Ben, when you were there in 2019?
How varied the landscape is, both east to west, as we go from kind of the plains in the west all the way to the alpine environments of the east near Mount Halgard, but also how different it is depending on when you're there. It's so green right now, but in 3 or 4 or 5 weeks from now, it's going to be all brown again. Yeah, the landscape really struck me, and also a lot of what we talk about at API is the culture of hospitality and the warmth of the people you meet along the trail. And that's not just sort of pablum. What was astonishing to me is everywhere we went, and it could be a cluster of 6 houses way up a valley, a dead end valley, and we're walking through there, and a man who's picking almonds out of his tree just comes over and starts giving them to us and telling a story. Everywhere we went, to a person, there was warmth and graciousness in the reception, which was just such a tremendously rewarding part of that experience.
Indeed. Leon spoke about wanting a more systematic approach and creating a plan for going forward. I was wondering if you'd tell our community today about what's happening now, what's in the works, why you're heading out, and perhaps while you do that, we could take another look at the map so that people have a perspective. What
I will be doing with the rest of the team when I'm there in May is a through hike. That is just what it sounds like. It's quite an accomplishment. Kudos to Leon, Lawin, and others to have now stitched together all of the different day stages. It's going to take us about 14 or 15 days to get through, but we now have a skeleton of a trail and a physical baseline from which to proceed in the trail development process. It's not just walking the trail and verifying existing map coordinates and paths, and sort of retreading newer sections that we've only been on once or twice. It's also really a formal kind of roll up of the key stakeholders along the way. The community level guides, some of whom we've known for a long time, some of whom are newer to us. The outdoor clubs who are going to be really key to the actual marking and development and maintenance of the trail, and really sort of embarking on the enterprise of bringing together in a coherent fashion this diverse and geographically broad ecosystem of people who are really the elements that constitute what this work is.
Leon and Lawin mentioned their friend Ahmed Razani, that beautiful photo by Emily Garthwaite, who fought for freedom to do something as simple as going for a walk. And he said that the mountains have gone for him from being a refuge to a place of recreation. We have a question from a participant today, Diego de Soto, who says, I have roots in Latin America, where indigenous populations sometimes regard mountains as sacred. Does this also occur in Kurdistan? And can you talk about how that shows up?
Sure, I love that question. The word sacred hasn't come up, but I think that's more of a function of language. A lot of the times I'm working through the good offices of Lawin's translation. The absence of the word sacred notwithstanding, there is an obvious reverence, and I don't think it's too bold to say sacredness in regards to the mountains. It really is a core part of the cultural identity. So there's sort of that larger context there for Kurdish people, but then talking at the individual and household level, like with Ahmed Razani, the lived experience of the mountains has been so distinct, so powerful, right? Helping them survive through the depredations of the Anfal campaign. It's the source of a lot of their livelihoods. There is such an intertwining of the people and their location, which is mostly the mountains, that I would easily say that they are sacred to the Kurds.
We are very fortunate to have the representative of the Kurdistan Regional Government joining us today. Bayan Abdurrahman, if you'd like to address that question, we would be very, very glad to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Anisa, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Ben. It's been really interesting to hear what you've been saying. And I agree with you. I think the mountains are sacred for us, even if we don't necessarily use that word. Mountains play such a big part in our folklore, in our history, in how we see ourselves as a people. I mean, you know, let's say if you're from a Gulf country, the sea will play such a big part in their life and the way they think, maybe even in the way they would decorate their home, the way they would dress, in the way they would see themselves in the world. And I think growing up with mountains as such a deep part of our culture, we do see the mountains as sacred. And there is that phrase that we use, no friends but the mountains, because the mountains have provided shelter for us from our enemies on so many occasions. So absolutely, the mountains play a very big part in our identity.
Then I have to imagine, with the conversation of there being perhaps more landmines unexploded in the Kurdistan region than anywhere else in the world, that must be just a terrible, just heartbreak for you and your people.
It is. That's why we admire and promote the work of organizations like the Mines Advisory Group, MAG, which I think actually originated in Kurdistan. It's a British NGO, now also an American NGO, and it began in the early 1990s. And I think Kurdistan was one of the first places that it operated in. And the work of MAG and other mine removal NGOs is really critical to the everyday life of the community there, but also to projects like this. I would say people in Kurdistan are pretty well aware of which areas to avoid, where not to go, and Mine Advisory and other organizations have played a very big role in that as well. But yes, absolutely, it's heartbreaking. It's so easy and quick to lay down mines and booby traps, and then so difficult and painstaking and expensive to remove them.
And how does that impact our work then as developers of trails?
In many ways, yeah, they are an affront to the human and natural landscape. Really besmirch them at the sort of conceptual and spiritual level, but at the practical level, it means very close consultation with local stakeholders, that is communities and local security and intelligence elements who have knowledge of the minefields, not all of which are marked. So we don't generally go anywhere, even in the sort of ramblings of scouting, which sometimes requires, in a day, 3 different attempts to get from point A to point B to find the optimum route. We don't set foot in a space where we don't have reliable information about mines and UXOs.
And thanks to the intervention of Bayan Abdurrahman and the Kurdistan Regional Government, we have been in touch with MAG. and they're being helpful to us. Bayan, thank you for making that connection for us.
Thank you.
I'm also wondering if you would say something, Bayan, about the role that you hope tourism may play in the advancement of the of Kurdish culture, and particularly in perhaps as a new part of the revenue generation for the Kurdistan Regional Government.
Yes, hopefully those who are joining us today know how beautiful Kurdistan is. The scenery is absolutely stunning, and I am biased, I am Kurdish, but I have heard people say that from all over the world. And really tourism, I think, is a very natural industry to promote in Kurdistan. We have the scenery, we have many, many biblical sites, many historic sites. For example, the battles of Alexander the Great took place there. The Temple of Ishtar is there. The Erbil Citadel makes Erbil the longest continuously inhabited city in the world. So history, heritage, faith, all of that plays a very big part in Kurdistan, as well as perhaps, let's say, more modern and adventurous pursuits like river rafting or mountain climbing and so on. And this is one of the pillars of the economy that the Kurdistan Regional Government wants to promote. We do fairly well in attracting domestic tourism from other parts of Iraq, and some tourism from the neighboring countries, for example, Iran. I think for a lot of young Iranians, Kurdistan is a place where they can relax a bit and you know, the rules aren't so strict. Do some nice shopping and so on. But really for us to broaden tourism, to make it a strong pillar of the economy, we need to do more investing in some of the infrastructure. So these days, if you're a tourist, you expect Wi-Fi pretty much anywhere. And there are still remote parts of Kurdistan where there is no real Wi-Fi coverage. So there is some infrastructure investment that we need to make. But I should say that I think the Abraham Path initiative and the trail that you're working on could be a trailblazer, excuse the pun, in other ways as well, in, you know, helping us work out ways of training people to be guides, host families to be established for people who want to have a really authentic experience rather than staying in a hotel. So there's a lot that we can learn from what you're planning to do as well.
Well, it sounds like we're setting ourselves up for a lovely partnership. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to hear your voice.
Thank you for inviting me.
So Ben, do we have some plans to be doing the guide training and all?
Absolutely. That's really integral to the trail development process. It happens concurrently with the physical trail being developed itself. We're going to replicate and slightly modify a guide training that we developed with the University of Bethlehem under the auspices of a World Bank grant in Palestine that helped us co-create what is now the Palestine Heritage Trail. That curriculum is very robust. It was a year in duration and had many modules covering everything from wilderness first aid to how to manage a group of people. So it's pretty thorough and was quite successful, I think. So we're going to bring that to the Iraqi Kurdistan, and in conjunction with what I hope will be a university partner, offer it to several cohorts of guides in the future.
Thank you. What a lovely way to lay out what is before us and what we aim to do. I'm so excited for your journey, your upcoming journey, Ben, and I'll be wanting to hear a lot. When you come back, you will be with Leon and Lawin on our webinar in May. Abraham Path Initiative is a not-for-profit. We're based in the US, and these webinars are part of our education and outreach mission, that being to introduce people and cultures from the region we commonly call the Middle East to a growing global audience. We are really excited to raise funds right now for the technical through hike of this trail in Iraqi Kurdistan. Our board of directors has stepped up. They're offering a one-to-one matching grant, so your gift now will be worth twice as much as it would have been otherwise. Please go to our website, abrahampath.org, and click donate. Be part of this step-by-step process of creating new opportunities for getting to know one another and seeing the breathtaking place that is Iraqi Kurdistan and meeting its wonderful, wonderful, hospitable people. We thank all our supporters who are watching today too. Couldn't do this without you. We are going to leave you with a short film made by Leon McCarron a couple of years ago. It was produced on one of the earlier journeys to Iraqi Kurdistan. I am Anisa Mehdi, Executive Director of the Abraham Path Initiative. And for all of us here at the Abraham Path, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next month.
We've just arrived in Kurdistan, and we've just heard that there's a gathering of Sufi mystics. This whole thing is about love, which is why anyone's welcome. In a region like this, that's an important message to hear. This is the amazing thing about Khalid, is that he turned up in his polished brown shoes. He looks more like a lawyer than a hiker, but as soon as he gets on the mountain, he's at home. We've heard about this trail in Amidi. We're going to walk the old donkey track to Mosul. I can't imagine anywhere on earth I'd rather be right now. We're surrounded by mountains. We're joining a shepherd, and it is bloody freezing. These guys are tough. The next part of our journey has brought us to a temple cut into the side of a rock. This seems a terrible, terrible idea. There's so much here, there's so much coexistence between ethnicities, between religions, between tribes. It doesn't get talked about. We came here looking for trails and for tales, and we found an abundance of both. Yeah, that works.
Yeah?